please don't jump ahead to where I start drawing these stairs, because what I'm going to say now is really important to understand in this whole video about how to understand stairs and perspective and how to draw stairs in perspective, because stairs are a wonderful illustration of the fact that perspective creates patterns, and if we can see the patterns, it helps us see the perspective far more easily, and if we see it more easily, we'll be able to draw it more accurately. So let's have a look. The first thing in any consideration of perspective is to find the eye level, and the eye level is up here. Now it doesn't go through this person's eyes or through their head, because I'm on much higher ground to where she is. So the eye level is higher than her, and that was where my eye level was. The other important thing to do, and that I always do, is for whatever I'm drawing, I find the two most significant angles and have a good look at them. The two extreme angles. And so one of them's at the top of this staircase and the other's at the bottom of this staircase. And we can see that those two lines actually will meet on the eye level further along. And then I can appreciate the fact that as we move away from the eye level between these two perspective extremes, that the lines will gradually increase in angle. And that's the first really important pattern to notice. And so when I draw, I've got to make sure I slowly increase the angle with every line I come down. Certainly don't draw them parallel. Every line is slightly different, slightly greater angle, because I have to spread the angle from this one to this one in every line. So that's the first pattern. However, perhaps the more important pattern, or the less obvious pattern to see, is the one I'm going to tell you now. A little education about steps. Steps have two main words to describe them. The first word describes the flat part on top, which is called the tread. Pretty obvious because we tread on that. And the other part of the step is this part is called the riser. And again, that's pretty obvious because it rises up. So what we want to do when we look at the stairs is to see the pattern between the treads and the risers and how it changes as the staircase moves either away from us or closer to us, up or down. And the patterns change according to all of those things. But in our particular example here, if we focus on the treads, and if we see the treads really as these strong white lines going up, we can see that these white lines get narrower and narrower and narrower. And that's the pattern we see. The white lines, the treads, are getting narrower, with the exception of this tread, because this step is actually narrower than the others because it's been cut short to make room for what was once a doorway. These treads, we see them as they rise, we see them more and more edge on, which is why the view of them changes. And because we see them edge on, the foreshortening increases as they go up. Now with the risers, it's the opposite. As the risers go up, there's less and less foreshortening. Now that should mean that we see them larger and larger if there's less foreshortening, but they do get further away. So that affects that change. But we can see, just by comparing these, if you like, black lines with the white lines, we can see the black lines don't get as small as quickly as the white lines do. And so that's another significant pattern to realize, that the risers increase in size more than the treads decrease in size. But it's easier just to see the pattern. The white lines get thinner and the black lines get thinner, but not as quickly. And it can be helpful just to consider what would happen if the stairs kept going up or kept going down. If they kept going up, it wouldn't be long before these white lines became too thin to see and just became lines, and we'd just be looking at the risers, edge on. But the opposite would happen if the steps continued down into a basement. In the end, we'd be looking straight down onto the treads, and that would be all we'd see, treads, and the risers will have disappeared out of sight and have just become edges. So learning to see the patterns in stairs is a tremendous help when we go to draw the stairs, which is what we're going to do right now. So I start by measuring this left-hand side line. As always, I use my pen to get the angle, as accurate as I can, or to check the angle that I think it needs to be. I don't start with the bottom step because that's a short step because it was cut to allow for the doorway. So I start with the step above that. When I draw my second step, I realize I've made it too wide. It doesn't become noticeably smaller than the first step. So annoyed with myself, I pay particular attention to decreasing the treads as the steps go further up at that point. And again, the important thing is not to draw any of these lines parallel, but to always slightly be tipping each line higher and higher to increase that angle. Now, having done the steps in place, and I work out roughly that last step, so I get that in place. Now, I'm deciding to draw this little bit of ruined wall next to the step because it does provide the right-hand edge to it, and it's also a wonderful structure in itself. Whitby Abbey was an enormous monastery that was sacked basically by Henry VIII when he sacked all the monasteries and dissolved them and took their wealth for the crown, which meant for him. And this huge building began to fall into ruin from that point, often largely because they took the lead from the roof, and then once the roof was exposed, the buildings just, the weather came in and they all fell apart. So there's this doorway that remains of what was once an interior staircase in the abbey. So having drawn that, I've now decided to make a little more work on the steps and to put the lines to indicate the blocks of stone that the steps are made of. Now again, notice that these aren't parallel to that left-hand side of the staircase, and they follow their own perspective pattern. So the angle of each of these lines increases as it moves to the right. And so I need to get that pattern in place as I do these. So again, once you see the pattern, then it makes it much easier to draw accurately because half the work is done. The lines almost jump into place themselves. And I usually do the line a little bit lightly so that if it's not quite in the right place, I can correct it in either direction. Now I put these last few stone blocks in, and I just finished the top of this little ruined part here. And then I'm thinking, I'm having so much fun. I hadn't planned to, but I'm going to put tone onto this. So I get my Copic markers. So I choose my Copic marker N4, N for neutral grey, and Copic colours come in 11 shades between 0 and 10. And so this is the number 4, so it's the 5th tone. It's a nice colour. It doesn't photograph black. It's a nice dark colour though, still a grey though. So I do the risers, and then I make sure I carefully do the shadow of the risers on the treads, which increases as the steps get closer. And then I do the shade on the little ruin of the wall next to the steps here, and have a quick look at that. And then looking at this, I realize that I haven't done all the line work. That's a fairly common thing I find. So I just add the stone block marks on that bottom step, and I decide to trace in the stone work on that landing at the bottom of the stairs as just a nice way to finish off the drawing. And then it's done. How do you think it looks? Hi, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope that was helpful. Learning to spot the patterns in perspective can make it much easier for us to understand what's happening, and therefore when we're observing our subject, to take in more information more quickly, more accurately, and therefore give us much more chance to actually draw it well. So I hope it works this way for you. I'll see you next time. Bye.